The Apollo 8 mission to the moon. When you think of the most amazing lunar mission in the 60s, you probably think of Neil Armstrong and Apollo 11. Well, I would like to tell you more about Apollo 8, the first manned mission to orbit the moon. It can be argued that Apollo 8, and not Apollo 11, was the greatest event of the 20th century in regards to space exploration. The Apollo 8 mission took place in 1968. Apollo 8 had been planned to be a mission to test equipment in a low Earth orbit. However, in the autumn, NASA officials changed the mission plan. Instead of testing equipment in orbit around the Earth, it was announced that the United States would send men to orbit around the moon. This would be the very first manned spaceflight to leave Earth's orbit. Why did NASA change the mission plan? One reason is that the CIA incorrectly told NASA that the Soviet Union was planning to launch its own manned lunar mission. It had also been reported that the Soviet Union had sent animals, such as Russian tortoises, into a lunar orbit. The other reason is that the United States had a goal to have a man walk on the moon by the end of the 60s. With 1968 wrapping up, time was running out. NASA decided to jump forward and speed up the process by sending men into a lunar orbit for the first time, in order to prepare for landing men on the moon. So it was decided that Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders would leave Earth's gravitational field, orbit the moon, and return once again to Earth. They only had about 3 months to prepare, but they decided they were up for the challenge. Although the decision was controversial, and many believed the mission would not be successful, the launch took place on December 21st, 1968, at Cape Canaveral in Florida. Traveling to the moon took 3 days, in which they were not able to see the moon. During this part of the trip, Borman became sick, presenting some awkward challenges. Next time you vomit, think of Apollo 8 and be grateful that at least you are not vomiting in zero gravity. As they got closer to the moon, they prepared themselves for the trickiest and most dangerous part of the mission. In order to position themselves into the moon's orbit, they had to perform the lunar orbit insertion maneuver perfectly. If they did not do it perfectly, they would either be flung into space or into the surface of the moon. Oh, and they had to do this while on the dark side of the moon, which meant they had no contact with Earth. Fortunately, they accomplished the maneuver successfully, putting themselves into a circular orbit around the moon. After regaining contact with Earth and checking on the spacecraft, the astronauts began to describe the moon. Jim Lovell described it this way: "The moon is essentially gray, no color, looks like plaster of Paris or sort of a grayish beach sand. We can see quite a bit of detail. The Sea of Fertility doesn't stand out as well here as it does back on Earth. There's not as much contrast between that and the surrounding craters. The craters are all rounded off. There's quite a few of them, some of them are newer. Many of them look like, especially the round ones, look like hit by meteorites or projectiles of some sort." Borman called it a vast, lonely, forbidding expanse of nothing. In addition to talking about how the moon looked, they took many photographs and observations. Part of their job was to find a landing site for future missions. While taking photographs, the astronauts saw something they hadn't expected, but became one of the most memorable and historic views of the mission and the century: the Earthrise.
Get it quick enough, look at it to see if it might be anything volcanic. Oh my God, look at that picture over there. This is the Earth coming up. Wow, that's pretty. Hey, don't take that, I'm guessing. Got a color film, Jim? Hand me a roll of color quick. Oh man, that's great. Where is it? Quick. Down here. Just grab me a color. Oh, I got it right. Oh, that's a beautiful shot.
After orbiting the moon 10 times and gaining quite a bit of information, it was time to come home. It took 2.5 days to travel back to Earth. Early on the morning of December 27, 1968, Apollo 8 re-entered Earth's atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean. It splashed down in the ocean south of Hawaii. It took 43 minutes for someone to show up because it was still early and the sun had not risen. But eventually the module and the crew were on board the USS Yorktown aircraft carrier. So what is the historical significance of the Apollo 8 mission? Well, it was the first mission to accomplish several things, such as the first manned mission to leave Earth's orbit and gravitational field, the first manned mission to orbit the moon, the first manned test of the Saturn V rocket, the first image of the whole Earth taken by humans, the first photographs of the far side of the moon, the first photographs of the Earth rising above the moon's horizon, and the first live TV coverage of the lunar surface. In addition to these milestones, Apollo 8 affected many people on a deep emotional level. The Apollo 8 mission raised the morale of mankind and especially of Americans. 1968 had been a chaotic and depressing year in many ways. However, seeing that mankind could dream and then fulfill those dreams against all odds inspired people and brought hope back into the hearts of the people. The Earthrise photograph is claimed to have started the environmental movement. Many who saw it were impacted by the vulnerability and fragility of the planet. They gained a greater desire to take care of the Earth. It did indeed change the way we see the Earth. Whether or not we see it as an environmental issue or not, we all feel a little more small, united, humble, and grateful as we witness both the vulnerability and the grandeur of this place we call home. To conclude, I will use the words of T.S. Eliot. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time.